Doesn't matter if you only have a limited number of words. The moment you are able to communicate and express your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions, then this is your language too.
Welcome to Beyond Borders, Real Life English's new talk show. So today, I have a very special guest joining us from Tel Aviv, Israel. Pronunciation and accent expert, Hadar from Accents Way. Hadar, welcome to the show.
Brucha ba'a. Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here.
And if you are new here, I want to invite you to join our global community by hitting that subscribe button and the bell down below, so that way we can help you to understand fast-speaking natives, to be understood by anyone, and to connect to the world. Just like Gregor, who says that thanks to our lessons, he is the only one in his English class who doesn't sound like a robot.
I think the industry does not help with a certain ideal that is drawn, whether it's fluent in 3 months or speak like a native, or working on nuances that no one can hear, and then it just makes the person feel incompetent. I think this is not helping and creates that sense of perfectionism. If you master this, you will succeed. And I think that our job as educators and people who really deal with the language, you deal with Spanish as a second language, and you know what it's like, and you know that unless you welcome those mistakes, it's like those vulnerable parts, that would be the only way for you to really feel courageous in the language. And I've also seen it with my students, because in the first few years, I still had that mindset of it has to be perfect. It has to be like that exact sound. I would be very picky, and I wouldn't talk about this whole mindset aspect and freedom, and the results that I used to get for my students were not as powerful as when you do go deep, allow this freedom, and help them change their mindset about what is the end goal and what are we really trying to achieve.
So it's really like starting with that purpose, right? You're starting like even from a deeper place of, why am I learning the language and everything, rather than focusing first of all, on like what are all my mistakes and stuff, what am I doing wrong? So focusing instead on like, why am I doing this, right?
Exactly. Like our brain is anyway biased towards all the negative things. So if we focus on that in the language, it really takes up a lot of brain space, and then how will the words be available anyway, right? Like how would you be able to come up with the right structure? So you have to know what your motivation is, and it's not even, I find that it's not even about becoming fluent or it's really like your self-identity, it's your self-worth, your self-esteem, how you're being respected by others. It's that one achievement that you owe to yourself. And people struggle with that for years. I know you've seen that. There's always more that they want to achieve. It's not just the language, it's just that English is a reflection of the things that we achieve for ourselves in life, and it's a personal achievement more than it's a language achievement when we feel free and fluent.
So many of you from our community have told me that our lessons help you a lot with your listening, your vocabulary, and even your pronunciation, but that you are still frustrated because you do not have many opportunities to practice speaking English. Well, that is exactly why we built the RealLife app. Now, at the touch of a button, you can connect to other English learners from around the world and practice your speaking while discovering other cultures in fun and dynamic, short conversations. It's just like your virtual passport to the world. So in addition to all that, you can improve your comprehension with real-life native conversations. You will understand 100% and never forget the most important vocabulary. Now, I bet that all this sounds like a dream, right? Well, now, with the RealLife app, it is a dream come true. The best part? It is absolutely free. So download it now by clicking the link down in the description or you can just search for the Real Life English app in the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store. I look forward to meeting you there. One thing that I really love about like your method, I think it really sets you apart, and it really impressed me like last time that we talked, and you kind of were just getting at this, is that I feel like a lot of teachers out there, a lot of YouTube channels, podcasts and everything, they make this kind of like clickbait content saying like, you know, sound like a native, like you said, like fluent in 3 months, or, you know, sound like a native. So many English schools promise this as well. And on the other hand, I feel like you go to your channel, and the thing that I think really shines is that you're empowering learners to own their own individuality, their own voice. I know I've heard you say a lot, like speak like yourself. And I think in our research, like something a quote from you that I really loved is, you've said, every voice needs to be heard, and my work is to help eliminate all stereotypes, beliefs, and conventions that prevent speakers from feeling like they belong in a language that they weren't born into. So could you tell me more about that?
It's a conscious choice to not promote native speakerism, which is this assumption that, you know, there is a sense of superiority based on where you're born. And it's not just what language you speak. People who are native speakers are more superior, and they have a better ability to teach the language. And sometimes, you know, when it comes to applying for jobs, people look for only for native speakers. So this is something that we need to uproot and to discuss, because everything that makes the non-native speakers sound like less than, we need to recognize and eliminate, because there is nothing wrong about saying very, and there is nothing wrong about saying thank you, right? Like, and it keeps generating like that, those trends or those teachings. It keeps generating this notion that what you're doing is not enough. And as we talked about before, like, I think it really, really inhibits people, and it overwhelms them. They think, okay, so there is so much for me to learn. I will never be able to do this. And I'm like, no. As long as you can communicate your message, English belongs to you, and you belong in English. And it doesn't matter if you know your parents spoke to you in that language or not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you only have a limited number of words. The moment you are able to communicate and express your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions, then this is your language too. And constantly comparing yourself to others is you know, it creates this sense of inferiority. And when you operate from there, then it's not only that you won't be able to reach your fluency goals, it would also put you in a position of, you know, of constantly not being good enough. And anyway, as human beings, we experience that fear of not being good enough, the imposter syndrome and perfectionism, because we want to please other people, and how do people see us? And I think that the whole conversation around it, and the lingo and the marketing, is just perpetuating that. Educators need to be conscious of that, and not to take part in it, even though it might be worthwhile, or it might, you know, help you get seen more. And also the same thing with schools that only hire native speakers. Why, right? Like, we can't support that as a community, as teachers, because, you know, there is no reason why native speakers would be considered as better teachers than non-native speakers. I'm a non-native speaker teacher. So does that mean that I'm not qualified to teach in any one of those schools? I have a community of teachers, of language teachers, and they're remarkable teachers, and 80% of them, because they're non-native speakers, won't be able to apply for certain jobs. So I think that this movement of stopping, like of changing how things work, is so incredibly important, and I think we are all responsible to take part in it. It's not just about how you think about yourself, and it's not just about, you know, what content you consume. It's also who you choose to learn from, because I think that when you only follow the big names on YouTube, for example, then you can definitely see that there is like a dominant sound and a dominant color, and that does not represent English. That does not represent how varied English is. And then you go out to the real world and you come across all these different accents. Some of them are native, some of them are non-native accents, and then you're like, wait, is this incorrect because I don't know this, or I don't even know how to listen to this because I was never exposed to it. So I think that as learners, we have the responsibility of recognizing that English has different sounds, different colors, and we definitely want to explore that as learners as well, because there is so much freedom to the language, and I'm afraid that sometimes when English is taught, we don't have the same freedom. Does that make sense? Right. Or is it a little, yeah?
No, there's like so many things that, so many different ways that we could go on the different things that you commented there. So kind of opened up Pandora's box in some sense. But I find this absolutely fascinating too, because I think that we can place the blame obviously like on schools and stuff that only hire natives, but like in the end, they're kind of providing what the market wants, right? And I think obviously a big thing that we have to re-educate, and I loved what you said kind of about responsibility as content producers, as I guess public figures in the ESL world. I think part of our responsibility is to kind of break this myth of the native speaker, because you can have like a wonderful native speaking teacher. You can have a native speaking teacher that doesn't know anything. It's like in school, we like learn some of the grammar and stuff, but if you go to the United States or you go to the UK and you ask someone on the street, why do you say this in such and such way? Most people are going to have no idea. They just know that it's said that way. So if you hire a native teacher, depending if they don't have a lot of experience, that could be what you're getting. And maybe that's good if you just need conversation practice, maybe that's enough. But do know that like native speaker doesn't always mean better, because you can have a non-native teacher who they really know their shit. I mean, they like love English, they've been learning it. If they speak the same language as you too, I mean, like if someone from Israel wanted to learn with Hadar, for example, it's like you've been through that same journey of going from Hebrew as a native language to having to learn English. So it's like you can probably explain the pronunciation really well, like how you figured out the pronunciation.
Yeah.
You can explain, why the grammar is different or something from how you would say it in Hebrew and how you would say it in English. So I think that this is really undervalued, and it has to come from like learners too, that maybe you have to like reflect a little bit on what do you need right now as an English learner, and maybe a non-native English teacher will be much better for helping you to kind of get what you need right now. So you should definitely consider that, and you shouldn't overlook that. And I think too, there needs to be like certain regulations maybe that don't allow schools to discriminate against non-native teachers. I mean, it needs to come down to, does this person, are they passionate about teaching, and do they know how to teach, Going back to something else that you were saying, you were kind of mentioning kind of this English in the real world in some sense of like what you're going to encounter when you go out there isn't necessarily just American English, or it's not just British English. I think most people, I'm coming from like the European perspective where, we're kind of a boiling pot of different cultures and languages and stuff. But in general, if you're working in any business that's a global business, you're not going to just be speaking English with Americans. You're going to be speaking English with people in Israel, in Germany, in China, in Thailand and stuff. And so if you have only practiced speaking with Americans and you're watching all these videos like don't say thank you, don't say sorry, kind of like you were mentioning and stuff, and you're trying to use all these fancy alternatives, then those people might not understand you, and you might not be prepared to really understand them. And I think that's becoming more and more important, is that you are able to participate in global English, not just American English or British English or whatever the kind of like standard or native English that you're learning is. Yeah.
In fact, and I recently read an article about it, generally, native speakers are often misunderstood or are having a harder time communicating in a global setting, right? So it's the native speakers who need to change to be more understood with, without using all those sports idioms and, like expressions and once in a blue moon, where it's great to know, right? Definitely great to know. It's great to be able to use those. But I think that when it comes to global communication, we have a certain set of rules, which, requires people to be better listeners, native and non-native speakers. So you need to train your ears to hear different voices. So going back to what you said, yes, like English doesn't have one sound. Open yourself up to different Englishes. But also, yes, you need to modify your speech a little bit to be better understood. And again, I think that's the job of the native speaker, but also that gives freedom for non-native speakers who would have that freedom of just using basic vocabulary, not going too fancy, not using expressions, and doing really well. And I think it's something that is definitely important to remember. Dare to show up. The more we normalize different sounds and different voices, and then when there's more representation, then people dare more. Because right now, a child that grows up and watches Hollywood movies and Netflix, then the majority is the sound of the most of the people who speak is very, very distinct, and it doesn't sound like them. And I think that then they would be afraid to speak up in public or make videos because it doesn't sound right like English is supposed to sound. And I think that the more we normalize foreign accents, non-native accents, I think we would have more representation, more people would dare, more people would show up. It's not a coincidence that I'm one of the only I wouldn't say only, but there aren't a lot of non-native speaking teachers teaching in English on YouTube. There is a lot of criticism and a lot of crap that non-native teachers need to deal with when they speak in English. And that is a problem, right? It's the comments that we receive about our accents and our grammar and our typos, comments that native speakers usually don't have to deal with. I'm sure they deal with it as well, but it's, it hits differently, because if someone would respond or comment on my Hebrew, it wouldn't feel the same as when someone comments on my English, especially when I'm an authority in the industry, in the field, right? I'm teaching, I'm a teacher, so I need to, I am an authority. So I think it's not a coincidence, because people are afraid. People are afraid of criticism. People are afraid that if they have an accent, they wouldn't be considered as an authority. So I think that we want to see and we want to encourage more new speakers, non-native speakers of English to show up on YouTube and teach in English. And I love what you're saying, that you guys are starting to show that as a model, because yes, this is exactly what we need to do. That's the way to do it. And YouTube has an algorithm, and if you follow a few people, you'll keep seeing the same type of videos and the same type of people that you follow. And again, you need to be conscious of that. So going back to what we said at the beginning, make sure you diversify your feed. Make sure you follow different teachers, people of color that have different accents, who are native speakers as well, to recognize that this is, a lot of times I feel they don't sound proper. What's proper, right? Really? An accent that is not standard white American is not proper? That's English. So you have to deal with your biases and it starts with how you consume your content and who you follow. It's really language is power, right? When you know more languages, you're absolutely more powerful.
I love that. I couldn't agree more. It's definitely, there's something special. There's a quote that I think is from Nelson Mandela that's when you speak to a man in a language that he understands, that goes to his head. When you speak to him in his language, that goes to his heart. And obviously English is the global language and stuff, and that's not to say that we can't all communicate in English and be able to connect to each other's hearts and stuff, but I, as a language learner and someone who's had a lot of opportunities to travel, which I'm very grateful for, I definitely notice a big difference. It's anytime I go to a country, a lot of countries that I never would have thought I wanted to learn the language, it's I'm always drawn to at least wanting to learn some words, because it makes me feel like I can connect more to the people there. So I absolutely love that. I really felt like this conversation with Hadar was the bee's knees. So if you have enjoyed it too, then I want to remind you that today's lesson is just an excerpt from our new Beyond Borders talk show. Now in each episode, I guide you outside of the classroom and into the real world with insights from some of the world's best teachers, language learners, innovators, and global citizens just like Hadar, helping you to reach your highest potential in your English and in your life. Now, does that sound like something that you want to do? Then all you have to do is download the full interview with Hadar for free in the description below. And now it's time to go beyond the classroom and live your English. Aw, yeah.
I think that fulfills that teacher part of me that says, oh, it's so nice to give and to help. And yes, my courses are giving and helping as well, but that giving and helping everyone feels very good. I think that kind of it fulfills a little part of my heart that I'm able to do that. And yes, YouTube can be a career in and of itself, but it's nice that other people